anything but me. Yes, I just love him 'cause he's so crazy, just crazy about me.
Yeah.
Ooh, I love my ugly boy, so rough and tough, don't care about anything but me. Yes, I just love him 'cause he's so crazy, just crazy about me.
I know everyone else is doing this, but we quite often find when we put questions forward that there aren't any answers, so why not try and answer their supposed questions? Though they're not reasonable, most of them, and there aren't really any jokes, at least nothing that I think actually qualifies as a joke. Anyway, this will go on hours if I don't get started, so let's get going.
Are you able to understand the irony of responding to the perceived political correctness of the left with exasperated reactionary hypersensitivity of your own?
You're not on the left. Your ideas are antithetical to leftist thinking. You are authoritarian and elitist. You try to stand over other people, not with them. You're not on the left. And I don't think the reactions to the things you've caused are... well, they're not reactionary. Reactionary means conservative. It means in opposition to progress. I think people in our community, on the whole, are trying to preserve progress, not go against it. I would also posit that standing up and fighting against threats to free speech, free expression, the right to presumption of innocence and so on, all of which stems out of social justice warrior hypersensitivity, is not in and of itself hypersensitive. These are actually serious issues that do warrant protection.
What is it with you people and skulls?
I can't speak for anyone else, but I come from the goth, metal and industrial scene where skulls are part of the iconography. I think they look cool. I think they remind us of our mortality and what lies beneath the flesh underneath all of us. Really, they're just cool. Why do you have a problem with skulls?
How do you define right-wing? Anti-SJWs often have an aversion to being labelled as right-wing, yet they regularly defend the right and bash the left. Therefore, why is being labelled right-wing a bad thing to you? And if it's because right-wing is used as a pejorative, can you not see how labelling people as SJWs or regressives is also pejorative?
Finally, a use for those history and politics qualifications. The term right-wing stems back to revolutionary France, when those sitting on the right-hand side were those in favour of retaining the monarchy, tradition, the power of the church, the traditional hierarchies and so on. So, very, very broadly speaking, you can say that right-wing means conservative and traditionalist. Again, I can't speak for anyone else, but I am a left-wing anarchist, which means I tend to be against hierarchies, tradition for the sake of tradition, power and authority vested in that kind of way. So the reasons I'm against the right wing, and I take offence at being called right wing, are the same reasons I'm against social justice warriors, ironically enough, because they're authoritarian, because they try to set themselves up over others as a sort of moral arbiter, gaining their authority from sources just as dubious as the church ever did. In the modern context, speaking more generally, the right wing is small c conservative, tends to want to preserve the status quo as they are, tend to be corporatist, tend to be against redistribution of wealth, against civil liberties and so on, want to free corporations but constrict people, are in favour of a strong police state and all the rest of it. So these are reasons why I take exception. There are right-wing people in the anti-social justice community. They tend to be libertarians, which means they're socially not conservative. That's the divide, I think. I don't think anyone particularly defends the right per se. They defend the right of the right to speak, hold opinions, express them, and not to be dismissed, censored, and so on. That's where we might defend the right. Some people are right-wing, of course. Some people will agree on individual right-wing issues, but that's a different matter altogether. I would again point out that I don't think you lot, the opposition, the social justice warriors, I do not think you are left-wing. You go against core left liberal values, so I cannot see you as left-wing. Rather, we go against the self-styled progressives who present such a clear and present danger to left and liberal values. At least that's why I fight them. Being labelled something you're not is harmful, like racist, for example, or sexist. And it's just insulting to your own beliefs. So I don't like being called right-wing because I'm not right-wing. I don't like being called sexist because I'm not sexist. I don't like being called racist because I'm not racist. It's a mislabel. It doesn't describe my position or what I believe at all. That said, it gets used as a pejorative and a shortcut for I'm not going to listen to anything you say. So that's the problem with that. Whereas social justice warrior is pejorative, but it is also descriptive of a type of person. So it has utility beyond the insult. Regressive is the nice way of saying social justice warrior, but it's even more descriptive, even more applicable. It describes what's going on very well. So that's not a pure pejorative. So there you go. I hope that's answered that.
Rather than telling people you disagree with to drink bleach, wouldn't it be more productive for you to have an actual conversation about the issues you feel matter? Or is it just easier to do the bleach thing?
What even are jokes? Who knows? It's not a particularly good joke, but there you go. Ridicule is the only weapon that may be used against unintelligible propositions. Jefferson. There you go. It's a joke because whatever's going on is too ridiculous to bother with. There's nothing to grapple onto. It's just idiotic. So why not make an edgy joke? And we would love discussions, but you motherfuckers have everybody blocked, will not entertain debates or discussions at all for the most part, and when you do, fail utterly, quite honestly. So maybe there's a good reason you don't. I would well be up for debate and discussion, but you guys don't want it, so what's left?
You claim to be proponents of rational, logical, evidence-based argumentation. That's great. That's entirely laudable. But when I look at your online activity, when I look at, I don't know, for example, your Twitter feed, that's often not what I see. How do you reconcile this claim to be evidence-based and rational and logical against stuff like, oh, I was just trolling you, oh, I was just shitposting, or TLDR?
I am legion. I contain multitudes. Sometimes I want to have a rational argument, sometimes someone or something has already been insulting to me or is too ridiculous to bother with. See previous Jefferson quote. So there's different ways to approach this different things, and nobody is one thing all the time.
No, seriously? What is it with you people and skulls?
What is it with you and looking like Boris Johnson having been rescued after 18 months locked in a sex dungeon? Skulls are cool. Who doesn't like pirates?
Are you aware that the ridiculous buzzwords you helped to popularize, like SJW and cuck and regressive, have all lost whatever meaning they once had and only serve now as catch-all insults and pejoratives to derail any meaningful conversation?
Are you aware that you've done that for far more serious terms like sexism, racism, misogyny, things like that? You've rendered them into meaningless noises, meaning that genuine issues around those words will now very likely go ignored or be treated with intense suspicion because you've rendered them either meaningless or trivial through overuse. I'm with you on cuck, but that's much more of an alt-right thing than anything else. It's just bled through into general use. SJW still has utility, it describes you motherfuckers for a start, and regressive definitely still has utility, more so than SJW, which has started to be overused thanks to InfoWars and people like that. But I think the things that you've trivialized are far, far more damaging and important.
For the last time, what is it with you people and committing actual literal felonies? Like, you might want to work on that? I mean, I thought the Ralph retort was so rational when he was fantasizing about beating up women with dyed hair, but then he assaulted a police officer, and finally I was convinced.
Yeah, just like SJWs, and they're constantly being outed for paedophilia, child porn, stalking, all that kind of thing, all the doxing that goes on. Yeah, Ralph's pretty fucking hilarious in that context, isn't he? Ralph, though, I mean, seriously, he's more of a Gamergate guy than anything else, and he's a fucking laughing stock there, so... Yeah, Sarah Nyberg.
In videos and in the comment sections, anti-feminists often take up the most extreme or the weakest feminist position they can find, or they just straight up misrepresent what the feminist position is. Instead, why not take up the strongest, most robust feminist argument you can find and really challenge yourself?
We can't find any. And we address what's popular and well known, what turns up in the media, on BuzzFeed, for example, or in The Guardian. This is the feminism that matters, the feminism that's affecting the real world, the feminism that's affecting policy in the case of people like Gail Dines and so on. So that's what we resist, because it's causing harm, because it's what's popular, it's what's visible. Show me a strong argument, I'll fight it. Though, if it's a strong argument, then I'll probably agree with it. Which, going on past records, means it probably won't be feminist. There you go.
I am deeply concerned with male addiction rates, suicide rates, and abuse rates, because I have worked with these issues in the quote-unquote real world. Would you be willing as anti-feminists to put aside your differences with feminists for the greater good of addressing these issues, especially as the kind of solutions needed are not necessarily gendered? And if so, I would actually like you to let me know, because I'm not fucking around or presenting any gotchas here. I actually really think that we could get something done if we work together. So, yeah.
As people are tired of hearing, I'm sure I suffer from severe depression and bouts of suicidal ideation, cutting, that sort of thing. So this is an issue very deeply important to me. I've lost friends and acquaintances to suicide. I've got friends who are struggling with depression and suicidal ideation as well. I'm afraid to say that I have a very hard time trusting someone from your side when they say something like this. It would take a whole other video to explain exactly why, but we've had MPs laugh at the idea of discussing male suicide issues in Parliament. We've had attempts to provision things for men be sabotaged by feminist groups. We've had talks about these issues sabotaged by feminist groups. Charities that have lost funding, partly through campaigning by feminist groups. And personally, I think a big part of the problem is that these issues are gendered, but the solutions that are offered are often very feminized. That's certainly been true of my experience of the mental health system, both observing it and from inside the system. So I hope you appreciate why, given that experience, and it's not just my experience, there's a lot of caution and concern and worry when this kind of thing is offered. If, however, you're serious and you're willing to have a serious discussion about it, by all means, hit me up.
What is third wave feminism? Because I've often heard you folks insist that you have no objection to feminism in general. It's specifically third wave feminism that you have a quarrel with. So what is third wave feminism specifically? And what specifically about third wave feminism do you have such a problem with?
I need to shorten my answers, so I'll try and keep this really short. So you've got three main waves of feminism. I'd say my actual issue is more with 3.5 wave Tumblrist feminism, whatever this new current situation is. However, if you want to talk incredibly broadly, first wave feminism dealt with rights, second wave feminism dealt with the application of those rights, third wave feminism is where it all went off the rails. That's where you start to find bias, it's where you start to find more of the anti-male sexism, though some of that was present earlier. It's where you find the postmodernism, it's where you find standpoint theory and the rejection of science, it's where all those kinds of issues start to come in, and then that bleeds into the current problem.
Why is it that this feminist represents all feminists, but this men's rights activist doesn't represent all men's rights activists?
Whoa, wait, sexism all of a sudden? Ladies and men are different? So we're supposed to punch men and not hit ladies and open doors for men, but not ladies? Fuck you, get out of my face, you tiny piece of shit.
I don't know anything about that guy. He might be a men's rights activist, I don't know. He might just be getting pissed off that benevolent sexism still exists and he's run into it and run afoul of it and come off the worst for it. I don't know anything about him. Trigglypuff, however, we do know about. She's definitely a feminist. Social media profiles and everything have been known. You know, she turned up to protest an event. You know, she's not abashed about being a feminist. And she is kind of the avatar. She is a living cartoon. She is the hyperbolic nonsense that people have made up in order to embody feminism in political cartoons and so on. She is living it. It's weird.
Why am I continually asked to answer for the views of feminists if I agree with feminism's overall aims, but don't agree much with those particular feminists? Does that mean that I can ask you to answer for anybody who labels themselves similarly to you, even if you don't agree much?
Feel free to call me to account for things that I am a proponent of, for things that I say I actively believe and promote. Don't expect me to be held account just because me and someone else are against something. You know, I can answer for free speech. I can't answer for someone's right-wing beliefs beyond their belief in free speech. It's like asking an atheist to answer for Stalin. You know, his atheism was not the important part, and it's questionable whether he even was an atheist, but that's beside the point. Whereas you are saying, I am a member of this group that believes these things, I am upholding and promoting it. Therefore, you're held accountable. Different things.
If SJWs are bad because they spend too much time whining and don't talk about real problems, then why aren't you talking about those problems instead of just whining about the other people over and over and over for literally years? I mean, in the scale of priorities, that's like even lower, right? You know, you've got the real problems, you've got the things that feminists worry about, and then you've got you going, how dare they? Just, how dare they have different priorities from me? Why can't they do what I do? Whine about whining forever for a living. That's healthy.
Let's turn this into a real example. I am concerned by a real issue, free expression. Feminists and SJWs complain about trivial shit that doesn't matter, such as representation in games, specifically all games, seemingly, or sexism, supposedly, in video games, things like that. And because of these trivialities, they attack the real issue, free expression. I debunk and attack what they do, present trivialities, by dismantling their arguments, showing that they don't have any effect, etc., 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 in order to protect the real issue, number one. They are acting irrationally and emotionally and threatening a core issue through trivialities, which I debunk in order to protect the important issue. It's not that hard to grasp.
Why don't you seem as concerned with actual feminist theory in academia as you are with wrecking people for views?
I'm very concerned. I'm very concerned about such hogwash being taught at all. I'm concerned about their sidestepping of peer review. I'm concerned about their corruption of science and scientific process. I'm concerned that their experiments aren't replicable. I'm concerned that people are coming out of university thinking this bollocks and then acting on it. However, a lot of these articles are hidden behind paywalls and things, so it's quite difficult to get at the meat of it. A lot of it is written in impenetrable language, even for intelligent and erudite people such as myself. So there's a lot of problems in the way of tackling it, and triage means we have to tackle what's going on in the real world first, I think.
Since so many of you profess to be admirers of second-wave feminism as opposed to third-wave feminism, I thought it would be interesting to ask which second-wave feminists in particular do you appreciate? Which books written by second-wave feminists have you read and found interesting? Which second-wave feminist activists have you specifically admired as you formed the opinion that you like second-wave feminism but you have no use for third-wave feminism? I'm just curious.
My relative appreciation of second-wave feminism is based on the fact that it seemed to be tackling actual genuine issues rather than trivialities. The specifics are not that important to me. We have to deal with feminism as it is today. So I think this is a dishonest trap question that's actually largely irrelevant. That said, I've read Steinem, Friedan, Solanas, Germaine Greer. I wouldn't say I particularly admire any of them, but second-wave feminism as a whole did some good work. So, yeah, that's, in the end, what probably really matters.
You do understand that reading the title of a book or an article or watching the first 15 seconds of a video is not going to give you a deep, nuanced understanding of what that book or article or video is about, right? That being said, how can you expect to understand or critique feminist sources if you don't even attempt to understand what they're trying to say?
Fair point, mostly, but this also applies in reverse. There are also some other things to consider. If I watch the first 15 seconds of a flat earth theory video, I pretty much know everything I need to know about that video. If I want to go into a detailed debunking point by point, then, I'll watch the rest. But often you can tell from the very start that something is just wrong, especially if it gives its initial premises upon which everything else is built in the first 15 seconds. So that can sometimes be sufficient. There's also another problem. A lot of pseudo-academia uses redefinitions of terms and weird linguistics that simply do not make sense. And it seems to be a kind of magician's distraction from the point. A lot of feminist theory is virtually impenetrable, and I'm a big advocate for plain English as a writer. Be plain.
Why is trying and failing to debunk a study into sexual assault the number one priority for a rational thinker now? Does it maybe say something about your priorities? Does it? Nah, it's fine, it's the feminazis, we have to stop them. They're taking away our video games. Look, Anita, I'm sorry, but we can't actually destroy video games. That doesn't make any sense.
I would hold that the most important thing, just about always, is truth. So let's assume that there is a problem with sexual assault. If we're to solve that problem, we have to start from a position of truth. What is the real situation? What are the real causes? What can we genuinely say is going on? What's the genuine rate? How can we hope to make any positive difference if we're relying on or allowing bad studies that make the problem seem much bigger than it is, that cause terror and lead to distortions of justice? How can we possibly hope to get anywhere if we allow that to happen? So when bad studies come out, of course we're going to debunk them. That doesn't mean you want sexual assaults to be gotten away with. There are other concerns here, like, are people disproportionately afraid because of the panic and the fear-mongering? Are people's rights being violated in pursuit of justice on the basis of these bad studies? We have men specifically, we have men's right to be considered innocent until proven guilty under attack. We have this whole listen and believe culture going on. That's antithetical to rational thought. These are big issues and big problems, so bad studies are going to be debunked. Because you debunk a bad study on a good cause doesn't mean you support that bad cause that it's trying to fight. Quite the opposite. If we're to make a difference, we have to start from a position of truth. And you go to Sarkeesian, who uses bad debunked studies and so on, the same way that people have tried for ages to use bad debunked studies to prove that pornography is harmful, or comics, or role-playing games, or music. It's the same thing over and over again. So debunk the debunking if you want to do something useful here, but the aim for everyone should be to get at what's true, and on the basis of that truth, come up with a useful form of action.
One of the major arguments that I see in many of your videos is that it is possible to separate criticism of the religion of Islam from the actual Muslim people. And yet, this line seems to be crossed very often. I see things like raghead or camel fucker or other things like that in your comment sections. I see people taking very serious shots at Muslims in videos and hangouts, and they don't get called out, at least not that I can see. So my question is this: why should a person of conscience who is concerned about the Muslim people and their community not being harmed or mistreated, why should they believe that you're actually only attempting to look at the ideas and talk about the ideas if you ignore bigotry that's occurring right in front of you? And in that light, would you be willing to break bread and salt with moderate Muslim people on your videos, have hangouts, invite them to your channels, just in order to build some bridges there and to learn more about what they think and how they feel and what their experience has been, so that information and knowledge can be furthered?
I don't know who you're talking about. Sometimes I know people use harsh terms when talking about Muslims, usually just after a massive terrorist attack, and pretty much specifically to deal with the terrorists or attackers involved. So I think you're possibly, at least somewhat, still confusing criticism of the religion with criticism of the people. Again, I don't know who you're talking about. There are some people who hold genuinely nasty views, but even so, you're still talking about the religion, which does have horrendous retrograde beliefs in it. So when you say Muslim, you're not, indeed you cannot be being racist. You are being critical of the religion, no matter what you say, how harsh you're being. Also, you seem to forget that we are generally, by and large, free speech advocates, which means we believe people have the right to hold and express bigoted views. Personally, I can't say that I've particularly hung out with anyone who I thought was being genuinely racist or bigoted, except to argue with them, which I have done, argued with white supremacy.
Do you deny that systemic racism against black people is like a thing in general? If so, what? Okay, just step over, just cover your ears for a second and let the smart people talk. If not, why is it so much more important to you to demonize groups like Black Lives Matter than to actually use your platforms to discuss actual solutions to issues surrounding race and racism?
I don't believe overall there is systemic racism against people of colour, if you want to use that phrase. I think it's a veneer, a covering, a veil over deep-seated class issues, class and wealth issues. Even more so in the States, though there is more racism there than here in the UK. So while there is racism, I do not think it's this systemic plague affecting absolutely everything to the degree which people want to go after it. I think those issues have been already largely dealt with. I think people perversely seem to wish that there was still racism of the kind that there used to be, so that they have something righteous to fight against. I would rather get to the truth. What's the real issue? How can we actually solve problems? And that's what I end up arguing a great deal, that we need to go after the real problems, which I see as class and wealth issues, something that can unite across racial lines, rather than being divided across racial lines. And that's the smart people talking. Thank you for your patronisation. So on that basis, why go after Black Lives Matter? Well, returning to the earlier argument, I place the highest value possible on truth before everything else. If you want to solve problems, you have to start from a position of truth, of accurate information. I do not believe that Black Lives Matter, which has been largely, apparently, hijacked by black supremacists, is a particularly good place to go for information. I don't think it's solving any problems. I think it's deepening the racial divide, and I think it's continuing to cover up the wealth/class divide, which is where we should be focusing our attention. So that's the long and the short of it.
If you've ever discussed or done a video about black on black crime, when are you going to do a video about white on white crime and what we as white people can do to solve the problems in our community?
White on white crime does not appear to exist in the same disproportionate degree that black on black crime does. If we're divided by wealth and class, I expect we'd see something different, but again, I would contend that that's the issue in black communities too. I think the point is that if your concern is for black lives, why does it stop at police killing blacks, largely criminals? I'm against armed police and armed populace anyway, but that's a side point. So why is your fixation on that when many times more people are being killed by each other in these ghettos and places? That would seem, on the basis of triage, to be a big issue, a bigger issue. I think police militarization and so on is an issue across communities, across races. It's, again, another wealth and class issue, but also one of authoritarianism and other issues. So I think black on black crime is a legitimate thing to point to and to say, look, this needs solving first. It's a far bigger issue. It's a far bigger problem. But people don't seem to want to tackle it.
Why is a literal teenager's different definition of racism from you so horrifying that you all have to go, no! No, we have to stop him! We've got to debunk him now! Ah!
Earlier, there was criticism that we don't go after academic feminism and issues stemming in academia. This redefinition of isms comes from academia. It's an Orwellian attempt to redefine racism, sexism, all other isms along the lines of power dynamics. So that's why it's important. Our little friend there is an example of dangerously lunatic ideas from academia bleeding out into the real world, and their videos present an opportunity to examine that issue, debunk it, tear it to pieces, show that it's bullshit, and make the world just that little bit better.
Wherever did you get the idea that racism was a self-applied identity? And if the only true racists are the racists who self-identify as racists, how can we ever expect to make any social progress to reduce racism? Or did I just answer my own question?
That's such a poorly structured question, it's hard to decipher quite what you're saying. We do have a problem with people hurling sexist, racist, etc. charges against people with no real basis whatsoever. So I think possibly what you're referring to is a slight reaction to that, in that people who are racist are people who are actively racist, who are not ashamed to be racist, who express those views openly, as they should be able to, and we should argue back against them. So I think what you're asking is that. So I guess the point is that an authentic racist is not someone who would deny it. You know, they genuinely hold those views. That's someone you can be certain is a racist. Whereas just someone who's been labelled as a racist, well, you still have your work ahead of you to prove it. I think that's the question, so I think that's the answer. But I don't particularly agree with either side on this one.
You often say that you are for equality of opportunity, but if people of color, for instance, have to overcome barriers whites do not, such as discrimination and unequal treatment, as are well documented in various studies, then how can the current situation be thought of as equal opportunity in any real way? And why do you consider it racist to discuss these issues?
I don't consider it racist to talk about these issues, but I don't consider them to primarily be issues of race. I consider them to be primarily issues of wealth and class again. How do we get to equal opportunity? If we're arguing for equal opportunity, and that doesn't necessarily mean that we think it necessarily exists yet. Our argument would be to lift people up, to provide them with opportunities, regardless of race, to make sure that everyone gets that fair shot. Your argument appears to be to make up privilege, to pretend that just being white gives you some huge advantage in life, and to penalise people for this perceived unproven advantage, rather than helping people. And when you do want to help people, you seem to do it by discriminating against other people. So you talk about things like positive discrimination or diversity hiring and things which actively penalise others, create resentment, and create inequality. So two problems then, I think, is result and execution, where we disagree.
Do you understand basic English syntax? Like, you know, if I say this cat is pretty, I don't mean that all other cats aren't pretty. Like, do you really not get why saying all lives matter in response to Black Lives Matter is not only racially insensitive, but just patently ridiculous?
I've done a whole video on this. I'm not about to go over the whole thing again, but in short, Black Lives Matter is an exclusionary focused thing that divides people. All lives matter would include black lives and suggest that everyone should be treated equitably, and is a far, far better message for all it has been co-opted by racists. But then again, so has Black Lives Matter, so much of a muchness. Go watch my other video.
Isn't it offensive to men to assume that a man could only ever want equality for women, and therefore be comfortable with feminism as a whole in order to get laid, and that reduces us to beasts? If that was the case, wouldn't I attempt to get laid from my views instead of not ever trying that?
It's meant as an insult and a stereotype, so I wouldn't take it that seriously. Then again, it wouldn't exist as a stereotype if it didn't keep happening, as is well documented. So, there you go. I'd just add that I don't think you are for equality, and that's probably why you get seen in this negative light, because you seem to have given up on any thought for yourself or your own gender. You're a gender quisling, to put it in hyperbolic terms. That's how you come across. You have abrogated your own masculinity. You have taken on all this guilt that you have no reason to be taking on, and it has, in the eyes of many people, unmanned you.
If you say you're an egalitarian, will you call out the man-hating slurs that you see coming from people within your community? People who use terms like cuck, beta male, faggot, or mangina? All of these things basically distill men down into thinking that the most important thing about them is to be having sex with a woman. That's rather offensive. So what are you doing to stop this kind of behavior in your community?
If you can't stand the bants, stay out of the rants. Why are you taking this seriously? That is a general question about a hell of a lot of things I could put to you people. Why do you take everything so seriously? I believe in free speech more strongly than pretty much anything else. So if people want to say those things, they can go ahead as far as I'm concerned. I try not to, but God, some people.
What is the number of followers, the number of likes, the number of dislikes, the number of retweets, the number of subscribers, any of those numbers, any of those metrics, what have they got to do with the argument? Deepak Chopra, for example, a man who trots out an endless stream of pseudoscientific quantum woo bollocks, has nearly 3 million followers. So what? Those people follow him because he tells them what they want to hear. Why even mention the number of followers you have? What difference does it make?
In this scenario, content-wise, you are Deepak Chopra. Just to let you know. Now, in regards to the veracity and validity of the arguments, it doesn't really mean anything. It's a fallacious argumentum ad populum. But there is one aspect in which it does apply. Your side often makes arguments that they speak for the silent majority of people, that, you know, there's this huge groundswell of people that support them, will buy their products if they put them out, will go and see a feminized Ghostbusters, whatever, all the rest of it. So that is an argument and an appeal to this invisible mass of popularity, which, as it turns out, from the statistics, you simply do not have.
Why is it that you go on and fucking on about safe spaces and trigger warnings and delicate little flowers, but continue to hide behind your cartoon avatars and your childish pseudonyms, and whenever anyone calls you out on your sexist, racist, homophobic, bigoted rhetoric, you become the argument of your own scorn and are hashtag triggered, as they say?
Trigger warnings, safe spaces and so on are an attack on free expression. They blunt the ability for people to converse. They've spread out of their little corners to take over entire university campuses, have started to be enforced on social media and other places, these ludicrously oversensitive values. So they represent a threat to free speech. Anonymity boosts free speech. It lets people speak their mind. That's the difference. It's a huge difference. It's a fundamentally important difference. When you accuse people of racism, sexism, misogyny, whatever, you show immediately the whole point, the whole need for being anonymous. Okay, I'm not anonymous, but a lot of people are, and I respect their desire to be anonymous and safe from those kind of attacks, because you follow it through into the real world. You don't allow it to simply be rhetoric and discussion. You accuse people of things that they are not, and then you go after their jobs. So there's a damn good fucking reason for people to hide. It's necessary.
Are you willing to publicly acknowledge and admonish the massive amount of hatred, bullying, harassment, and intimidation that a lot of your fans infringe upon people? And I don't mean these tiny disclaimers that you put under the description fold or flash for 2 seconds at the beginning of the video that you know nobody reads. I mean a public and ongoing anti-bullying stance. Or do you kind of like watching your fans go around harassing people and calling them slurs and telling them to kill themselves? You kind of like it, don't you? I mean, if that's your thing, and I guess that's just what you're into, just makes you a dick.
Hey, remember when we talked earlier about the devaluing of terms having an impact? You've devalued the word harassment to the point of meaninglessness. Similar with bullying, similar with other things. So when you say that people are doing these things, I really fucking struggle to believe you. I also wonder why you're taking it so seriously, why you aren't exercising the use of the block button in an actual useful manner, rather than just blocking people who might potentially at some point in the future, perhaps with a fair wind, disagree with you, Steve. So there's that. Also, we're not responsible for what other people do. That's entirely up to them. So I refuse to take responsibility for what other people do. That's on their own conscience. That's up to them. You've devalued the term. A lot of what goes on I don't think is harassment or bullying. A lot of it I think is just trolling, which you should ignore. And what little harassment and bullying remains is not my responsibility. So fuck off.
Why do you find it so hard to believe that feminists are being harassed online?
Again, I think the terms have been devalued. What you call harassment appears to, in large part, be merely being disagreed with. I also think that everyone gets harassed online to some degree or another. What I don't understand, what I don't believe, is that you take it so seriously. I think you take it too seriously in order to use it as a tool. You know, we see people like Anita Sarkeesian, for example, referring to obvious insincere trolling when they talk about all the harassment and terrible stuff that happens to them online. A top-down control upon this kind of behaviour will censor the internet, will kill it stone dead as something genuinely useful and open. We need to exercise our own controls over our own feeds, and the very few genuine issues of harassment and so on that go on can be dealt with by existing methods.
Do you understand the key importance of reproducibility and repeatability in scientific research? That simply going to Google Scholar, doing a 30-second search for keywords and pulling out the first paper you find that backs up your stance is not a particularly credible way to do research. That you have to have a much broader overview, to read the material, to follow the citations through, to look at the broad brush approach to a particular problem.
The problem with replicating studies is one that severely afflicts sociology and psychology. The soft sciences, it's not even science. That stuff. That's your arena. So when you bring one particular small-scale, already debunked study forward to try and support your point of view, all we have to do is find one equally worthless study to completely invalidate yours. So that's what's going on. You know, we're doing YouTube videos, we're having conversations on Twitter, we're not having a hugely academic discussion. So that's an unreasonable demand. If you've got one piece of shit study as evidence to support your point of view, and we can come up with another piece of shit study that goes against your point of view, the two negate each other. And so we're back to actually arguing the points, which is actually useful.
You do realise that you're as much of a social justice warrior as those you critique. It's just that you espouse a different form of social justice, a rather less considerate, rather less forgiving, rather less kind form of social justice.
There's a gulf of a difference between social justice and social justice warrior. The warrior part shows that you're an extremist, but it also shows that you are frivolous. It shows that you are part of the regressive left, in that you're seeking to roll back and damage extremely hard-won left and liberal values. That in your pursuit of what you claim to be progressive, you are causing harm and you are sending us backwards. Segregation, censorship, authoritarianism, and so on. So many of us do advocate for social justice, but we're not social justice warriors in the same way that you are. Because we are not that extreme, we are not authoritarian. We are not threatening to destroy all the fruits of the Enlightenment on the flimsiest of pretexts.
If you identify as an egalitarian, then I'm interested in your take on the usefulness of the concept of the original position as laid out by John Rawls in his theory of justice.
I think you've set this question as a trap because you're a smug academic and you think people won't have read Rawls and you think Rawls must somehow be the only valid egalitarian position, and you think that anyone who describes themselves as an egalitarian must therefore be necessarily familiar with Rawls. I do know Rawls. I find his view to be somewhat naive and to be an overcomplicated expression of the idea that if you were to be randomly dropped into a society could be anywhere. How would you construct that society? What society do you think would be the fairest? That's similar to his original position idea. So while it's a useful thought experiment, I don't think it has any real applicability. And some of his other ideas are definitely more about equality of outcome rather than equality of opportunity, which I would reject. To explain briefly why I find it naive, I would say look at people in poor positions in society today who do know that they are in a bad position, but who nonetheless espouse economic libertarian ideas, vote Conservative, vote Republican, and so on, vote against their own best interests because they somehow still believe that they are temporarily embarrassed millionaires, to quote Steinbeck. So you've got people who are in unquestionably bad positions who would still vote against their own best interests, and in Rawls's situation, original position, would still do so.
As a supporter, as a proponent of freedom of speech, why do you want to quash academic freedom? If you're not familiar with the concept of academic freedom, it's worth, in the UK at least, looking up the 1988 Education Reform Act and seeing what that says about the rights of academics to put across unpopular opinions.
I'm not against them expressing unpopular opinions. I'm all for unpopular opinions, provided they have a basis in truth and reality. My objection to this kind of academia is that it is not academic, it is not scientific. You're being sold a lemon, basically. It's like an advert telling you all the wonderful things that this product can do, but then it doesn't do any of them. If you're going to call yourself academic, there are standards to be upheld. If you're going to call yourself a scientist, there are standards to be upheld. And if you do not meet those basic minimum standards, then you have no right to call yourself academic or scientific whatsoever. And you should not be treated as academic or scientific. So that would be where my problem lies.
Why are you so obsessed with Anita Sarkeesian?
She's a famous, terrible, terrible feminist and social justice warrior who has caused and continues to cause harm disproportionate to any academic, scientific chops that she has or the worth of any of her ideas. Speaking for myself personally, I have lived through previous moral panics where heavy metal came under attack over suicides and Satanism, where role-playing games, which are my bread and butter, my living, came under attack because of Satanism. I lived through the satanic panic. There were book burnings. There were kids not allowed to form clubs at school. There were people having their band t-shirts burned and so on. And this is a replay of the same thing. I've seen it happen. I don't want to see it happen again. And just as Pat Pulling was the major figure against D&D, so Sarkeesian is the major figure in this moral panic against computer games.
Do you really think you can spend your entire life in a perpetual state of emotional immaturity? Do you actually imagine that you will be able to perpetuate your adolescence for your entire existence? Wait, didn't somebody else ask this one? Wait, I gotta... fuck.
Yes, quite right. That applies to you far more than anybody else. Though I wouldn't say adolescence, I would say pre-adolescence. And that's it. What have we learned? Fuck all, apart from they don't know what a reasonable question is and have no sense of humour. Look, if you actually want a serious discussion, you could talk to us, but you don't. You block, you hide, The only reason I really bothered to reply to such a long video is because so often our side asks questions and they're never answered, even though they are much more sincere and better constructed and better phrased than what we have here. This was a parade of straw men and nonsense for the most part, but I've tried to answer it as honestly as possible. You can find me if you want to talk. If you like what I do here, please like, subscribe. You can find me on social media, on Twitter at Grimachu, James Desborough on Facebook, James Grim Desborough on G+. My main website is postmortemstudios.wordpress.com. If you want to help me out with a little money, which will go to support my games, writing and other projects, you can do so at Patreon, which is also Grimachu.